Good morning. My name is Brax Montier. I'm with UFLTV, and I'm here interviewing Dr. Kim Openshaw about parental alienation. Dr. Openshaw, do you want to introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I appreciate having this opportunity, Braxton, to be here with you and to discuss several issues, beginning with this of our series in parental alienation. I am a retired university professor from Utah State University. I developed their marriage and family therapy program. I've also been involved with the Department of Psychiatry since the early 80s when I moved back from teaching at the University of Wisconsin. Um, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's degree in clinical social work and learned marriage and family therapy, and a doctoral degree in uh, family studies and one in child development. I've been involved in forensics work, both in training as well as in the court system. And one of the areas of forensics has been child custody. During the time that I've worked with child custody, parental alienation has been a real area of focus because it seems to raise its ugly little head every time we start looking at custody issues.
Yes. And like you said, we are going to have a series. I think it's going to be 4 total videos about parental alienation, parental estrangement, and then how those factor into custody evaluations and custody evaluations as a whole.
Correct.
All right.
So let me begin here before we start moving into the slides. You know, we talk a lot about abuse of children. And in fact, it's interesting that it can be a felony to have domestic violence in front of a child. And yet, parental alienation has those same attributes of violence, often in front of the child, and even more intensely, not just in front of them, but we involve them in the process. And yet, this particular area is not legalized to say, okay, if you're doing these kinds of things, you know, you're subject to arrest. And that's kind of a sad commentary. And I just want those who are going to be listening to this to understand that I believe parental alienation, the factors involved in it, are as serious as domestic violence in front of a child and certainly is a form of abuse of a child.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's heard the story of a very difficult divorce where one parent is pouring poison into the ears of the children and turning them against the other parent, whether that's the father or the mother. So behaviors like that are definitely harmful to children.
They are, and we just don't seem to quite get that yet. And perhaps one day we'll get to that point. And maybe as people listen to this, they'll be more sensitive to that and help parents understand that what they're engaging in is a behavior that is, you know, has serious consequences on a child. So if we look some at our agenda today, we see we're going to look at the divorce process. We're going to look at some of the factors that influence divorce, what I refer to as the reactive divorce, the onset of parental alienation. And while I'm putting these as separate topics, you're going to see them interwoven as we go through. What is parental alienation? We'll look at a definition of it, a desired outcome. If a custody evaluator is encountering such a situation, you know, what would we really like to see as a desired outcome, though that's not always the case. And when I, as an evaluator, you know, recognize that parental alienation is, you know, what do I do? How do I handle that?
Yeah.
And I've kind of put a little map up here some of the things we're going to be talking about. You're looking at the emotional kind of um, disintegration that happens and the context that's brought in, the social coldness. There's this avoidance. There's some entrapment of the child into what's called triangulation. And this is happening in a subtle, ongoing process. It's not typically oh, okay, we're going to get divorced and all of this happens. It's a process. And because it's a process, even education of those in marriages would be very helpful to look at what they're doing and how parental alienation comes in and what happens if we have a contested divorce. How does that play out in the form of parental alienation?
Yeah, it's divorces don't just happen overnight. You don't just wake up one morning and go, you know what, getting divorced. Um, there is a lot of stuff that tends to happen in the in between where there are things that are leading up to it. It's not just one event. It is just, the collection of small things that eventually breaks the camel's back. So,
Yeah, it really is. Okay, so let's take then a look here. If we're looking at the divorce process over time, what I found and what studies seem to indicate is that there begins to be this emotional disintegration. You know, kids today get married and they're looking and they're happy and they're excited and they have this emotional connection. It's just not sufficient to bind them. And so
yeah,
simple things start coming in, and without some skills of how to deal with them, there is an emotional disintegration that begins to happen. As that
yeah,
begins to happen, you see physical disintegration. That's maybe a little bit on. And again, it's so subtle that at first you don't notice it. Maybe I spend just a little bit longer at work and don't come home quite as early. And when I am home, until I really don't want to be involved with things. And, I've got an understanding wife who says, oh, I understand. You've had a hard day. I'll leave you alone. So she gets doing her thing. I get doing my thing. Maybe I get into gaming or whatever. And all of a sudden, this disintegration happens. Eventually, we start talking about, we've grown apart. Um, Maybe we got to do a separation. Problem I found with separations are typically just a statement of divorce. And
we're
I
going to
don't know
be
what you found.
separated, and this will eventually lead to divorce. We're going to try being apart for a while. It's divorce light. You're just trying to uh, test the waters about being. You're trying to figure out what being divorced is going to be like without actually jumping into it before you decide on it.
Yeah, and we have developed a process called structured separation. What a structured separation is it's basically saying, okay, if you're going to be separated, let's design this as if you're divorced. And let's put some rules and boundaries around it. Okay? How are we going to handle the children? And who's going to pay for what with the children? And who's going to live where? And how are you going to manage the finances around that? And can I have a liaison with somebody else, while we're still married, but we're separated? And so it's a very structured contract that the people read. But the unique thing of this is it's not an open-ended contract. It is a 12-week contract. What means is we have 12 weeks and we do some very intensive therapy intervention. And the intent of it is for you to really look at this, make a decision. And if you're going to divorce, then really we're helping you move into divorce in a more amicable way. And
Yeah.
so most people go into a separation and it's just, okay, you go your way, I'll go my way. And things just accumulate. And so divorces are more than likely to occur. So this is kind of the process of divorce. So what impacts divorce amicability? So again, we see the marriage, even at the beginning of marriage, there are factors that begin to impact that relationship. Communication, consideration, conflict management, companionship, uh, in-laws, or sometimes called outlaws, however we want to look at it. Uh, Independent time, togetherness time, lots of things are into that relationship. But if, as we say, this relationship begins to dissolve and we begin distancing, and then we move into a separation, then we start thinking about what is going to affect the that have a real binding nature on how amicable a divorce is going to be. One of them is money. Somebody
Yeah.
wakes up and they say, oh, goodness, how am I going to make it? We don't have two incomes anymore, or a income anymore.
Yeah.
And
That's
so money is a problem.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people fight about. A lot of things really just come down to you're not managing the money well enough, or we should have more money, or we should have something. We should have the ability to keep up with the Joneses down the block, or some other form of trying to keep up with the Joneses. You know,
Well,
trying to
well
stay ahead of the trends or something
mhm.
like that.
Yeah, I mean, minimally, you get, I deserve the lifestyle I have when you were here. Minimally,
Yeah,
if not something better. And that just is not going to happen. If I've got two incomes coming in, unless I go out and start working another job, I don't know how you're going to have a lifestyle that is similar to what you had before. So money becomes a real issue. And not only money, but other assets. If you have a side by side, who gets the side by side and how much is it valued? Who gets the TV? Who gets the clock? I mean, you begin to see just all sorts of crap coming in with this issue of money.
yeah,
My concern is that one of the things is that children then get trapped in this money thing, because children are money. They're
yes.
assets, and
They're expensive assets.
they are expensive assets. And so if I'm going to bring my children in, if I need custody of the children. And I wonder, do they want custody? Believe that they can do the very best for the child, or do they want custody of the child because that it becomes a source of income to them?
Yeah, a lot of people have problems with alimony and child support because they are worried that the child support isn't going to be spent on the children. You know, if it's take like a mother and father for instance. If the mother comes to him and say, "Hey, I need some more money for Billy's football gear," or something
Mhm.
like that, and the dad is thinking, "Well, I just paid you $1,000 in child support. Why is none of that going to the football gear?" Or something like that. But a lot of people have worries that the mother or the father, whoever is receiving the child support recipient, is uh, using it to kind of pamper themselves, treating it as just extra fun money instead of taking care of the children with it.
Yeah, and the sad thing, Braxton, is that there is no required reckoning of where that money goes. I mean, granted, there are expenses that are there by having them in the home. It may increase the electric bill and I mean, there are honestly some given factors that they have to look at. It's when those factors are not taken in consideration and the money that comes in, like you were saying, becomes just, oh, I've got some extra money. I think I can go shopping. And then we start asking, well, the kids need some underwear, or the kids need socks, or well, where did the child support money go? Well, we've got a lot of expenses having children here. And it's almost the children get blamed for the fact that there isn't this other income coming in. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting dilemma of children are an asset, but they're also a liability in
Yeah.
these situations.
Yeah.
If
So
Go ahead.
no, I was going to say sometimes it becomes a fight for custody because one person wants uh, a lot of child support. They want their whole reason for seeking sole custody is to get more child support. And on other hands, you have somebody who's just like, no, I want an equal schedule because I can take care of my children an equal amount of the time, and I want to pay a fair amount.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so there a lot of tension is held up in that for a lot of
Yeah,
people.
yeah, and there's a lot of fear associated with that.
Yeah,
Okay, and there's a lot of money is power.
yeah,
And so if I've got money here, I can have power over you, or asking for it. And who's going to deny the children? Well, I need football gear for the kids. Well, where did the money go? Well, I'm using the money on the kids. But, I'm not going to deny my children some of those opportunities. At the same time, I'm going to really want to know, I want some accountability. Where is this money going? That's just not going to happen. So if that can be reconciled and people are comfortable how they've got the status of the children worked out and who gets them when and how long do they have them, and this is the cost of this, and this is the child support we're going to give to it. Um, then we have an amicable situation. Now, it doesn't mean that can't change, but we have an amicable divorce going through. Very little problem going through mediation or anything else of that nature. Money is reconciled, and I think there's a greater possibility of when I come to you and I say, hey, I need a little extra money for the kids for their football equipment. It's more likely for me to say, oh, well, sure. I'm not going to give a hassle about it. But if these are not reconciled, then the amicability diminishes and it becomes reactive. And what I mean by reactive is there is always contention. Everything that happens in relationship with one parent or another and the children is a contentious context.
yeah.
So we have a reactive divorce going on. Any thoughts that you have, Braxton?
No, that's a reactive divorce is what a lot of people think of when they think of like a really terrible divorce, where every little thing is either ammunition or a weapon or in some way is used to hurt the other party. And it's what you see often. Um,
Mm-hmm.
from what I've seen, a lot of divorces are reactive. Usually, if something's very amicable and they have all the terms, they don't really need to litigate things very often. So if they can sit down and go to mediation and sort everything out, they don't really need a, a lawyer, or they really just need somebody to do the paperwork to get them divorced.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you know as well as I do, I'm glad you brought this up, is that these are all on a continuum.
Yes.
Reactivity can be mild and it can be extremely severe.
Yes.
Amicability can be mild and it can be very positive. So we're on a
Yeah.
continuum. And there is fluctuations in the people. Sometimes there will be some reactivity. The issue is whether or not they're able to resolve the reactive issue and not draw the kids into it.
Yeah. When the
But
kids start getting
unfortunately,
used as pawns, that's usually the worst outcome for everyone.
right. So as this slide shows, and as we talked about, if we take the amicable part out of the divorce process and we put into the reactive, then we don't have any proactive kind of behaviors going on. So where does this reactivity go? Where does this anger, this hostility that I have go? I mean, it's got to go somewhere. I either take it to work and take it out on my employees, not likely, because I don't want to get fired. Okay. I may take it out on neighbors, but not likely. I have to live next to them. So where does it go? Well, it comes back into the relationships that are close, that are within the bounds of a little confined context. And children start getting pulled into it. So as we get moving down this divorce road, we have to begin thinking about what influences or increases the probability of reactivity. And if you read through this little statement here, it says basically anything that can be perceived and construed, literally or figuratively, as adversarial will enhance the intensity of the alienating parent's behavior. So, if I've got a parent who's already using the children as the weapon to get what they want relative to the other person, then anything that I do or is done brings up then this issue of aggravation in the reactive context. So, the inability to get one's ideal outcome. So I go to mediation and I've got my ideal outcome. This is what I want. Now, unfortunately, they come in with an ideal, and I don't have a problem with that as long as they also have a realistic outcome. This is okay. This is what I want. Here's where I can really bend and not bring suffering to the children or a financial situation or things like that. So, but if their ideal is unrealistic, that's going to create problems in this reactivity.
Yeah, well, especially in Utah where you have to go to mediation. If somebody shows up to mediation and is just like, well, it's my way or the highway, you have to do, I need to get the outcome that I want, or I'm going to make this very hard for you. Um,
Yes.
at that point, why did you even come to mediation? You're obviously participating in bad faith. Why would you waste everybody's time like that?
Well, think of the money that
Yeah,
it costs. I
yeah.
mean, they're worried about money, but you think how much does it cost to go to mediation? I mean, it's just not a mediator's time you're paying.
No, if you have a lawyer, you also have to pay for the lawyer, and the hourly rate on like the low end for a lawyer is like $350 an hour.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, if you're so concerned with money, why are you wasting it by not coming to mediation in good faith, or just trying to throw your money out the window by trying to jump over dollars to pick up dimes?
Well, I think that comes into the illogical nature of what happens when emotions come in, and we're going to talk about that in a minute.
Yeah,
Uh, but let's talk about psychological maladies. You know, if I bring some of that in, let's say I'm really narcissistic
yeah,
and I deserve this. then that is going to be a real problem that I bring into the mediation. So depression coming into the mediation. If I'm depressed, what I see sometimes mediation, what happens is the person gets everything they want and this person leaves destroyed. And sometimes we see suicides coming out of that. So psychological maladies bring into it. And depression is often defined also as anger turned inwards. So if I'm already angry about the situation, but I have no place to put it, then I turn it in on myself. These are things that really ought to be remedied before you ever go into mediation. And they ought to be ferreted out if they're coming into mediation at some level, either at the level of the attorney or at the level of the mediator, who hopefully would be astute enough to see some of these kinds of things and put the mediation on hold until those things can be reconciled. Well, what about
Yeah.
family and friends? I mean, it's interesting how when you have a marriage, all of a sudden everybody's loving and friendly. Man, I'm so glad to have you here, and I'm glad you're a part of our family, and we look forward to family events where we're all together. And then all of a sudden there's a divorce, and what happens?
They have to pick sides. Well, they feel obligated to pick sides. Like, well, were we better friends with Terry or Kim? And then they have to choose a side,
Yeah,
or they believe they do.
yeah, they believe they do, but and so it becomes polarized. And
Hmm.
when I polarize anything, in order to maintain the polarity, I have to become more reactive, more hostile in my behavior.
It has to
Or
become you're with me or you're against me attitude instead of we're trying to dissolve a marriage and figure out the specifics of that.
you're you're exactly right. That's exactly what it's saying here. Okay, and friends, here I've had somebody as my best friend, and it's my wife's best friend, and then we get a divorce. Well, we put that person in a terrible bind. And
Yeah.
sometimes one person starts to pull this person, and they start to tell all this little nitty gritty stuff that should have gone in the garbage can years ago. But we begin telling all of this, and sometimes it's contrived and certainly not the truth. And the goal is to bring them in to bond with me against this other person. So, ugly situation. Well,
Yes.
as soon as as soon as a person walks into an attorney's office, what are they expecting? Are they expecting a amicable outcome, or are they expecting a fight? And are they looking for an attorney who is really concerned about all parties' health and well-being and the best outcome for everyone? Or are they looking for a dog who can go out and beat the heck out of another person?
It really depends on the kind of lawyer that you get.
Huh?
There are some lawyers that are real bulldogs about everything, and then there are other ones that will do whatever their client wants. And that really depends on what you want. If you're the person seeking a lawyer in a divorce, it really depends on what you want. If you want a bulldog of a lawyer, I mean, you've got to be ready to deal with the fact that you have a bulldog of a lawyer and
Yeah.
do everything that you need to do and be just as proactive as they are. But if you want a laissez faire kind of, I'll sit back, we'll kind of see how things work, that's a choice. That's, you know, if that's the kind of lawyer you want, you can definitely find those.
You certainly can. And I really respect attorneys. I've worked with them for many years. And what I find in the vast majority of attorneys, especially family law attorneys, is that they are concerned about the family context. They don't want to beat this person up so this person gets custody and all of this child support. They really want to help. People who listen to those attorneys, it seems to work out really well. But sometimes they'll say, well, you're not the person I wanted. I want you to get in there and, like you said, I want the bulldog.
Yeah, you get the settlement almost all the way done, and then they're like, okay, we've got them where we want them. Now try to take everything.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I thought we were really trying to get this amicably settled. Uh, but it's like you said, some people aren't thinking straight. They're not thinking about how things actually work. They just want to hurt the other person.
Yeah, they're hurt.
Mm-hmm.
They're hurt. And hurt is a primary emotion. And rather than us feeling hurt, we move to anger. Anger is a secondary emotion. And so we put these primary emotions in abeyance while we bring out these secondary emotions that are oftentimes not healthy.
Yeah.
Well, the point is there's so many things that can come in and create that problem. So what begins to happen is we see here, parents start to fight with each other a little bit. The child at first is kind of out on their own, and this kind of stays between the two parents, particularly in this very subtle time period. Although, don't think children are stupid.
No,
They
children are not.
feel. They may not be able to verbalize, but they can feel and they know something's happening. They can experience that emotional context that's created between these fighting parents. Well, we start out with 100% logic, let's say,
Yeah.
and I have zero emotion because the only way I can be a pure AI is to have no emotion.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say I begin to put a little bit of emotion into what's happening. Now, most people think that there is a one-to-one change in emotion and logic. So for one step of change in emotion, you get one step of change in logic. So we get this nice curve coming down.
Yeah.
But that's not true. What happens is very rapidly, emotion interferes with logic. So our logic drops down to zero or close to zero with very, very little emotion being put into it. When that happens, you begin to see, you can see I've got this arrow now a little bit larger. You begin to see the onset of parental alienation much more clearly. And this is typically happening long before there's ever a custody evaluator involved in the process. And the sad thing is, who is the most likely person to get drawn into this battle between parents? It's the child.
Yeah. I mean, even unintentionally, especially if like an issue is like, back to something we talked about earlier, like, hey, Billy has school fees. You need to pay your half of the school fees, or he has sports fees that need to be paid, and then it becomes a fight between the parents, and the child thinks, oh, because this is about my school fees, I'm the problem, and
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember a case I worked on one day. I was over at the home and the mother and father had had this fight and the dad had shot out. Well, in this fight, what happened to come up a little bit was about a frog. There was that this little boy had brought home, and dad hadn't given his permission. Mom had said, okay. So we had this frog, and it was furious. And so dad left, and of course, they were already in the process of saying they were getting a divorce. And when he stormed back in, this little boy, I'm standing there, and this little boy just starts to cry. And he says, Daddy, I'm sorry. I'll get rid of the frog. Just stay home. I'm thinking, what are you doing to this poor little kid? It has nothing to do with the frog.
Yeah.
It has everything to do with the two of you.
Yeah.
And so that frog, like I've got here, you've got both of the parents kind of vying for the child. But alienation happens when one person vying for the child becomes so intense that it begins to disrupt the child's relationship with the other parent. So if you're an astute therapist or if you're in a custody evaluation and you're starting to see something, you're saying, well, I would hope that a parent would be wise enough if they see this thing that one, they would recognize the error of their way and change. That would really be
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
They'll alter their overt actions and become increasingly passive and covert, however. And so it appears as if a change is taking place if alienation has already begun its little ugly process.
That's when you get
Or,
the kind of minorly passive aggressive. Hey, you said you were going to be here, or hey, it's 2 days before Billy's recital. Um, it's at 7. I'm informing you now. When this person probably knew about it for 2 weeks.
and then so what do I do? Well, your dad just never comes, or your mother just never manages her time well enough to be here.
Yeah,
And
or
the
they show up
message,
late, or you know,
yeah,
you know,
and the message is that parent doesn't care for you or care about you. Or thirdly, they'll become overly compliant, though the motivation will not have changed. So we have three possibilities.
mhm,
One, they're going to recognize it and make change. Second of all, they're going to stop being so overt and become more covert and passive because they don't want to be seen as a bad parent. Uh, or they become extremely compliant, which is almost so sugary it makes you sick,
yeah,
to see it. But they become overly compliant, but their motivation has not changed. And so you see that happen. So what begins to take place? Let's take a look. What we see here then in this divorce process, the alienation is a product of several factors. Notice now we're seeing a stronger pool for the parents vying for this child. Still don't
yeah,
have one of them becoming the more dominant one, but it's happening. You're probably just not seeing it because it has gone underground.
yes. It still exists. It just they're not doing any. They're not screaming at you in public. They're now trying to manipulate the child or manipulate circumstances so that you look terrible.
Exactly. And what's happening in this process, as you see down the bottom, is triangulation already happened. We could go back and look at this here. Triangulation has already begun. It just
Mhm.
hasn't become so tense that the child is being damaged in the process. But at this point here, we're starting to see that triangulation becoming more intense. And so the real issues get skirted and the focus becomes the child, as if the child is the product of the process. So what do we get? Well, the unresolved divorce mediation is one of the things that lead to this. It's highly unlikely to have parental alienation if there is a amicable mediation process that brings about a outcome that both say we're good with. But if
Yeah,
it's unresolved, then we start having problems. We start seeing this intensification of emotional reactivity. And you can't become more intensely emotionally reacted towards the other party and not have it bleed into the relationship with the child.
Yeah. If every little thing between, a mother and father is a fight, the child isn't going to want to come to them with an issue about one or the other, or an issue that could be tangentially related to anything like that. Like, if this is an issue that dad has to involve mom, I don't want to bring it to him because I don't want to handle or have to deal with the huge blowout that happens.
Yeah, and there we're talking about a little bit more astute child.
Hmm.
But the younger the child, the more they're susceptible to the damage. So I've seen older children say, "What in the crap are you two doing? Go fight your fight. I am not a part of your fight." That takes a lot of courage and personal empowerment. I've seen it, not as often as I'd like to, but little children don't have that. And little children want love from both parents. And this certainly doesn't show it to them. Okay, so a brief definition of parental alienation. Look though first here what's happened. Now I've got one parent who's actively involved in the alienation process. Consequently, we begin to see the other parent beginning to have that relationship with the child damaged. We see the holes being put into it.
Yeah.
Parental alienation refers to the implementation of overt and covert pseudo-parenting skills. Now, I say pseudo because they look like I'm doing a good job, but really what I'm doing is I'm manipulating the child.
Mhm.
These skills that are malevolent and they're deceptive and they're designed to ingratiate the child to me while at the same time corrupting the relationship, as I pointed out here, with the other parent.
Yeah.
That's parental alienation.
Yeah, and like, it could be something as overt as you don't love your kids anymore, and a big fight that the children see, or it could be like as subtle as, I'm really good at helping you with your math homework. Your dad doesn't seem to really care that much. You know, maybe he just doesn't think you're very good at it, or maybe he just can't help you. It's like, okay, well, that's very hurtful to the relationship between the child and the parent, and the father in this case, because, well, he whether or not the father can actually help him with the math homework is the point. The point is the person's putting the little seeds of doubt into the
Mhm.
child.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Or that you have a set up telephone time. Oh, well, he
Hmm.
decided to go to bed, and you can hear him in the background. Oh, he's
Yeah.
got a friend over, so he can't talk to you. These are the kinds of things. Even what happens, the rules get set up, and they are not obeyed.
Or
And
they're like maliciously complied to.
yes, and so what do? Do I take the other person back to court? Because too often I take them back to court. The court can order something, but there are very few times that I've seen sanctions placed on the person who is doing the damage to the child. I don't
Yeah.
know what your experience has been, Braxton. I hear here in courts at times, if you do not obey this order, you're in violation of the court.
You
And
can you can move the court for sanctions or move the court to enforce an order, um,
mhm,
but I haven't seen a lot of sanctions actually get placed unless it's something that's very egregious, something that's very, like, you knew you had to comply with this order. We've already gone to court about this order. You knew that every there is no way you can deny that this was, X task that you needed to accomplish, and you chose not to. And
Yes.
when the person followed up and said, "Hey, can we get this done, please?" You told them to go pound sand. Like, at that point, you might have a court who's like, "Look, you're obviously, this person is being very flagrant with the rules, and so I'm going to sanction you, with a fine, or
Mm-hmm.
I think one of them is like 30 days jail.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think um, a lot of people have been sent to jail for it, but I don't know. I don't have very much
Yeah.
experience with sanctions.
Yeah. Well, my experience has been is if they are given their more outward, okay, I want you to do this, you're supposed to do these things, and they just don't happen. But going to jail for violation of the order, I don't see that very often. I don't even see fines very often. Because where would the fine money come from? Come
Yeah,
out of the child support.
yeah, especially if you're like in violation of not paying child support, and it's like I'm in violation of not paying child support because I can't pay it, because I'm like a diabetic who has a very expensive medication,
Mm-hmm.
or I have some other thing that I need to pay, or I just don't make very much money. The court
Yeah.
imputed me the wrong income, and so now I have a child support payment that I can barely afford,
Mm-hmm.
on a good month.
Yeah. Well, and then there's the reverse too, that I'm paying child support. I know a situation where I'm paying child support, but the mother won't let the children see the father.
Yeah,
And this has gone back to the court. The court has ordered the mother to do this, and the mother refuses. In fact, the triangulation has become so intense that the kids will want nothing to do with the father. And
yeah.
that's sad.
Oh yeah, and it could be as overt as, "Hey, you're just not going to see the kids," and then she goes and tells the kids, "Yeah, your dad's just not picking you up this week."
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, some of the underlying features, and people can read all these slides, but you look fear and hurt. Remember, I said those are primary emotions, and they come about. They are perceived rejection. You're leaving me. There's something wrong with me, And rather than working through the fact that I'm being left, even if they feel like they're being abandoned, they don't. They take this and they replace it by these secondary emotions of anger and hatred and even jealousy. And when those come up, it disempowers their ability to be logical. So their cognitive
yeah,
functioning is interfered with. So how can they really involve themselves in the interests of the child?
yeah,
It's illogical to think.
yeah. It's very hard to think rationally about any kind of issue when you're just focused on how hurt you are.
Yes, yes. So we see then consistent passive and aggressive behavior. That becomes the primary and fundamental interaction style of the alienating parent. And triangulation with the child becomes a weapon in their armamentarium. So the child is a weapon now against the other party. And you've given some great examples of that. Oh, well, you didn't get here on time, or, he's always late to your recitals, or, whatever the case may be.
Yeah,
But it now becomes the child. So we go through this same process here again. Now we're down, there's this comorbid integration. So comorbid means that they're both happening. It's like you can't have depression without anxiety. They are comorbid. They live together.
yeah,
One may be more dominant, but the other still exists within that same context. In this case, the comorbid integration of pathological triangulation. In other words, I'm using these maladaptive parenting processes, these malevolent skills to keep this child in my territory. You
Yeah.
know, I'm ingratiating the child to me through these things. It's a pathological. And the co-parental disintegration that happens. How can we co-parent a child when one person is pathologically manipulating the child?
It is very hard, I would imagine.
Yes. So, well, they've got 3 rooms in my house. Why are they sleeping in sleeping bags? You know, why do you have bunk beds here? They should be having their own separate rooms. These are these are pathologic kinds of things. Okay, so this I do want to read because this is parental alienation in action. So parental
Yeah.
alienation refers to a conscious. It begins out like we've said earlier, and you alluded to. It begins in a more of a subconscious, non-meaningful way. They're not purposely moving into alienation,
Yeah.
but eventually it moves into a conscious and active process where one parent actively engages passive and aggressive behavior, and that can be passive aggressive and active aggressive behavior in their interaction with the other parent while simultaneously employing covert manipulation of a psycho-emotional, a social, and a physical nature. So we got those 3. It's kind of a biopsychosocial phenomenon that's happening here. So the psycho-emotional, socially they're interfering with things, and the physical nature, their own well-being, that adversely exploits the attachment of the child with the other parent. Attachment is so fundamental. Some of the research I did early on had to do with self-esteem in children. And we were looking at like 30,000 adolescents. And we were finding an interesting thing. When boys and girls are moving into adolescence, the self-esteem of the adolescent female is highly dependent on the type of relationship she has with her father. Vice versa, the self-esteem that a boy has is highly dependent on his relationship with his mother.
Hmm.
Now, if I interrupt that, what begins to happen to their self-esteem? And Braxton, how important is self-esteem?
Incredibly important. It's a cornerstone of your identity. It's it kind of influences just about everything that you do.
It does. It influences a personal sense of empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
It facilitates a person's sense of social interaction and connectedness. I mean, you're right. There isn't something that self-esteem does not touch.
Yeah.
So, while the process began early on as the unhealthy, angry, contested divorce and hostilities are magnified, the child becomes the pawn, as we have already said, in the divorce arena, and the parental alienation begins to manifest covertly. Pretty soon, the person doing the alienation doesn't give a darn about who's seeing what. They just begin to blatantly act out. And can we do anything about it? Well, yeah, we can take them back to court. But again, they have a choice. They recognize it. They go passive on it, or they become overly compliant, but really don't change.
Yeah.
So if we look at this process, my belief is that the process of evaluation should really be a team effort. Let me just share, and you can see in this diagram here. One, there is the evaluator. Their role is collecting data, understanding
Yeah.
that there'll be variation across time, meaning that a child, as they begin to grow, there's going to be changes that need to be, and that evaluator has to be able to incorporate that understanding in the ultimate decision, because it must be something that has flexibility and plasticity across time.
Hmm.
So we have the evaluator. A guardian ad litem. We need someone to protect the interests of the child. Now, I don't think we need them every single time, but sometimes it's really critical to have someone there whose interest is the child. A clinician who facilitates intervention with parental alienation. Now, that being said, I think it's important to understand that if an evaluator gets to a point that they see this alienation process happening, I believe they need to suspend the evaluation, and there really needs to be a focused effort on altering the alienation process.
Yeah.
So a clinician may be involved. The clinician's position, now the evaluator is a clinician too, but his or her role is data gathering and creating almost a scientific type of research project that has a methodological design that is implemented, where results can be discussed and final conclusions can be determined. The clinician's role is to facilitate changes in the dynamics of the system, dealing with the alienation, dealing with the dynamics of the child with the parents. They have a great role in that. We talked about that. Social services. Uh, and I'm not meaning necessarily child protective services, but there needs to be someone who may step in and provide supervised visitation, supervised parenting of an alienating parent. So a team effort is really helpful. And of course, by the time this team gathers information from all of these different directions, then that final report can draw that together, and that can become the final decision that goes into the court.
Yeah. Well, especially because they exist on a continuum. You could have very, very minor kind of disagreements where maybe they don't need the guardian ad litem or social services.
Yes.
They just need a clinician who says, you know what, you guys have some problems. Maybe it's not, maybe you're just hurt because of the fact that you're getting divorced um, rather than just making mountains out of the molehill problems that you have of like, what should our custody schedule be? What should, you know, stuff that you probably could figure out on your own in
Yes.
reality.
Uh-huh.
But
And,
yeah,
and
but
sometimes they don't even need a clinician.
yeah,
But the evaluator, I believe the evaluation team should include the evaluator, who is one of them, and all of them are part of the evaluation team. So a psychologist who has the ability to do the testing data. Okay? A clinician who has understanding of family and child dynamics. And a social worker whose training is typically how to provide a psychosocial report.
yeah,
And so even that team, so really we've got two teams I'm talking about here. And it depends this one right now, the evaluator, guardian ad litem, clinician, has a great deal to do with the intensity in which we find the parental alienation happening.
Yeah. So something that is worst case scenario. This is the worst possible kind of scenario for these children. There's lots of parental
Right.
alienation. The parents can't even be in the same room together.
Mhm.
That kind of situation.
Right. And the other team is a team working together to do the evaluation,
Yeah.
each bringing in data from different sources that can then be utilized when I've got the data in and we analyze the data and the results come out and we create our conclusions from it.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, while further exploration in terms of the therapeutic intervention and how to do the custody evaluation and things like that, those are really what we're going to be doing in the next 2 or 3 portions.
Yeah.
Well, the next portion deals with parental alienation and then with the historical aspects of custody evaluation, and then a suggested model in which a custody evaluation could take place. So hopefully we've left enough of a cliffhanger that there's somebody saying, oh, okay, what do we do next?
Yeah.
So our hope, and I mean, I'm sure Braxton, I'm speaking for you, and I apologize, and Attorney Johnson's back, but we hope that this presentation has been instructive and helpful. And if so,
Yeah.
then hopefully you'll join with us in the next series of these particular topics. That being said, thank you, Braxton, for inviting me to do this. And certainly for everybody to know this was done in cooperation with Eric, who is the editor-in-chief and reporter for the Utah Family Law TV, and Braxton yourself, who's the reporter, and I certainly appreciate your help with this, Braxton. So, any last questions?
No, I think a lot of people are going to have questions more about for our next series, our next one on estrangement and how to kind of deal with that and identify it. So,
Yeah, and the difference between estrangement and alienation.
yeah, awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Openshaw.